Same thing for Maersk, the largest shipping container carrier in the world. They said, we're going to buy the next 8 ships will be carbon free. Do they have all the technology yet? No, but guess what? They're going to, because they're creating the market. It's like what we did with vaccines. It's like what we did with space. We created, the government's going to pay for this. We're going to do this. So people rushed to make it happen. So, you know, we're in a position where out of the COP, we also had not only the 1.5 degrees, we finished the Paris Rulebook, which will be essential to companies being able to understand how to trade, what the credits are, what the transparency is, what the accountability is. And in the totality of all the commitments made in Glasgow, the International Energy Agency and other entities have all agreed, if those promises are fulfilled, we actually would be at 1.8 degrees of warming. So look at this room. I mean, everybody's here because we're concerned about blasting through it. If we stay on the current course, we're going to blast through it. We're not going to keep 1.5. We may not even be able to now. There's some people who think it may not be that alive even now. But the fact is that if we do the things we said we're going to do, we have an ability to get there. But there's no indication right now that we really are of a mindset to actually do those things. In fact, coal use went up 9% last year. The IEA says we have to reduce coal use by 870 gigawatts over the next 8 years. We're on track to bring 300 new gigawatts online next year. Are you kidding me? We're subsidizing fossil fuel to the tune of $1.8 trillion or something. 440 billion of subsidy last year. So we're paying people to create the problem we're here struggling to clean up. Definition of insanity, frankly. So, folks, we have some big things to tackle. And you say, what do we need to do to get there? We got to tell the truth to people. And we need to change the mold. We cannot be doing business as usual. What does that mean? That means, you know, you can't go out and say, everybody in the world can't say, well, we're going to switch to gas. Because if you don't abate the gas, and right now it's not abated, if you cannot capture the emissions, yes, for 8 years it's a 50% reduction on oil and coal. But after that, it's just there by itself. And so it will continue to pollute at levels that are unacceptable to be able to achieve the goals that we have all set. So I'm for gas as a means of making the transition for 6 to 10 years, but the build out will probably be for 30 to 40 years, because that's how you finance that kind of an expensive plant. It needs the amortization to go for that long to be able to repay the investors. So we really have to be smarter than, in fact, we're sort of thinking we are after Glasgow. We have to figure out how we're going to help create a regulatory structure that will move people faster by incentive to do some of these things. Tax credits are a spectacular way of doing that. That was one of the best parts of the legislation President Biden's put in, but it's been stalled, as Senator Whitehouse has said. And by the way, there's been no greater, bigger champion in the U.S. Senate. He has spoken more hours daily to remind people of the climate crisis. And you know, it's critical now that we mobilize people differently. So what does this mean? I think we have to bring, look, here's the equation. I think you have to sort of simplify this. 20 countries equal 80% of all the emissions. What those 20 countries do will be the mark for everybody else in the world. If we can accelerate the transition for those 20 countries, which is what we're trying to do, out of COP26 came a commitment by 65% of global GDP to keep 1.5 degrees alive. So you have Japan and Canada and US, UK, EU, South Africa, all of them saying, we're going to do this. And their plans are certified to say, yes, if you do it, you could get there. That leaves 35% outside. China, 30% of all the emissions in the world. India, somewhere around 7, somewhere in there. Russia, and then Indonesia, Mexico, South Africa, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia. 8 countries, part of the 20. Some of them have very good plans. South Africa, ready to move to transfer from coal to alternatives. But they need finance, and they need technology. Indonesia, Alok's just been there. They got a great plan. They're ready to transition. But we need to bring finance and technology to the table to help them do it. That's 2 of the 8. Then you have India. India is committed to do 450 gigawatts of renewables. If they're able to do it, and we're all committed to work with them and help them do this, they're in compliance with 1.5. What an incredible message to the rest of the world, if that can happen. So we actually can do this. I think that's the critical thing to keep in our minds. And what we need to do is make sure we are organizing ourselves to actually get this done. And that means pushing harder, coming together in those 20 countries, joining together to help each other, act more as if we are in common enterprise, not just competition, and help the less developed nations to avoid making the mistakes that we all made.
Thank you, Secretary, and thank you for bringing your vision here into our conversation today, with which I fully agree. The truth is that if we look at all the NDCs that have been presented by countries, a big part of them have these conditional components. It means international cooperation is particularly relevant in order for us to be able to make this transformation, as you are saying. So I turn now to Minister Shukri and to us going into COP27 in this very complicated overall geopolitical situation. Minister, what is your view on how to navigate this year towards a successful outcome at COP27? We have a very short span of time to be able to show progress. That's also an additional challenge for all of us. So we would really very much like to hear your views on this. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Patricia. Let me start by commending you on your commitment, your dedication, your expertise, and how you have impacted the dialogue on climate change, and also the excellent work that the Secretariat of the UNFCCC has been undertaking. Undoubtedly, the momentum that has been created by COP26 is important to maintain, and we do necessarily recognize that this is an intergovernmental process and one that is impacted by the difficulties and the complexities of the international order that is coming under stress, and that is usually reflected in how delegations will maybe entrench themselves into national positions or into the rivalry that exists. But I think that, or at least we're hoping that the experience of COVID-19 and the global impact that it has had, and the recognition that these global challenges cannot be dealt with within the compartmentalization of specific national interests, but rather on the basis of cooperation and collaboration between states, is the only way forward. If we are to meet the challenge, we will all be impacted adversely, and we have a responsibility towards future generations to maintain the momentum of dealing with the challenges of climate change. And as the presidency of the forthcoming COP, we intend to play the role that the very competent presidency of COP26, Alok, has played in not leaving anyone behind, in recognizing the difference, interests, diversity of challenges, and hopefully meeting all of those within the consensual nature of our common responsibilities. We will continue to drive the ambition to meet the temperature challenge, maintaining the 1.5 But also, I think we have to recognize that we have to build confidence. And here, I've just returned from the summit, EU-Africa summit, which had a roundtable, very well attended, on climate change. And you could recognize that there is still a degree of apprehension within the developing world that the finance gap has not been met, that we need to do more in terms of adaptation, that the mitigation, though important and recognized, but the issue of adaptation, especially for the most vulnerable, the island states, it's an existential issue. And if it is not adequately recognized and steps are not taken to fulfill those needs, then we will lose that momentum and we will lose the desire to reach consensus. The global goal on adaptation and how we can move that forward, even though it is a process, but we have to also recognize that if we don't achieve during COP27 a degree of consensus on those goals and how to achieve them, the finance, the exchange of technologies, the rivalry that seems to be starting to exist in terms of alternative energy supplies, and maybe the need to provide that technology and provide those resources for the developing world to be able to transition effectively so that they can play their role, but they also need to see from the main emitters both greater emphasis and effort in mitigation, but also a willingness to deal with finance more appropriately. We all have to recognize where the deficiencies are and meet them head on, and are not trying to tidy over those issues, but rather recognize where the limitations. I think the corporate participation in this, and this was again well recognized, the civil society's participation, the need to have still the voices of the activist community, the NGOs in climate change, to keep us honest. All as government officials, we all are receptive and susceptible to the impact of our constituents, and I think that they are a very competent and potent to keep us on track and to motivate us. But the corporate and financial institutions also have an important role to play, and we will be hopefully attracting them to undertake the responsibilities and show the leadership that is needed so that we can deal with these challenges. The youth, undoubtedly, they will inherit what is either a more a more sustainable planet, or else they will have to deal with consequences that maybe are beyond our conception. So for all of these reasons, we're looking forward to even hosting a youth forum before the COP itself to maintain that momentum and to maintain that pressure on the negotiators, who we hope will look at this from a perspective of the benevolent good rather than the entrenched interests, and move ahead to maintain that ambition, level of achievement, and hopefully maintain the Paris Rulebook and implement it. Implementation, I think, is going to be the most important thing as we move forward. If we aren't able to implement all of the commitments made, whether in mitigation, adaptation, finance, loss and damage, then it's going to quickly unravel. And there are already those who might feel that, well, we've done 26, everything is fine, let's forget about the process and move ahead without having the constant year in, year out pressure that COP generates. And this is not the way forward, and we look forward to maintaining all of our ambitions. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. While climate change continues to outpace multilateralism and climate diplomacy, actually, and this is a reality. I want to stress one of the points that you have made, the issue of trust, and how much that is also linked to the support that is required for more ambitious actions in terms of adaptation, finance, capacity building. One of the very important outcomes in Glasgow was a commitment to at least double finance for adaptation. Yeah. This is, for example, one of the issues that we need to address. We need to address, and we need to address early, because there's very little time towards Sharm el-Sheikh. Thank you also, Minister, for sharing your views on preparations and for your commitment to make a very inclusive conference in beautiful Sharm el-Sheikh. I see that we have one question. We have actually very little time, but we have one question from the audience. And if I may just read it out and just freely share it with you, whoever would like to jump in. Beyond the rhetoric, what are the practical measures in the short term for countries like mine that rely on coal and other fossil fuels to meet energy needs?
Yeah. So maybe I can come in on this point, which is that, we were talking about this issue on finance, and the 100 billion was a totemic figure. We've set out a delivery plan, but actually the reality is, and we've discussed this in other forums, is that what it needs is there's trillions of dollars from the private sector to be mobilized in economies where we want to support them with a clean energy transition. So you saw this in South Africa. I mean, we put together an $8.5 billion deal as part of a just energy transition plan. And that is about ensuring that a country like South Africa can move off coal, can move into clean energy. And there are a number of other countries around the world which have got growing economies which have been reliant on coal. They want to make that change. They want to go to renewables, but they need the financial support. So, in the same way that I think we worked collectively, developed countries, the multilateral development banks, to put together a deal for South Africa, that I think should be